Hi, my name is Cameron, also known as Venus Theory, and welcome to PSP University. In this series of videos, we're going to be taking a look at a variety of topics like EQ, compression, using effects, some basic mastering concepts, and more. Throughout this series, we'll be taking a broad look at each of these subjects to help you better understand your toolset as a producer, and for those of you that are a bit more experienced, also have a bit of a refresher because I think from time to time it's helpful to review the fundamentals. In this first episode of PSP University, we're going to start breaking down the subject of EQ, and we're going to answer the big question: what is EQ? EQ stands for equalization, and even if this is your first day producing, you've probably actually used an EQ before. If you've used the tone balance controls in your car, like the bass and treble, or maybe on your home theater or your home stereo system, that's all the EQ is. But when it comes to music production, EQ is just a bit more specific and a bit more precise. Generally speaking, most EQs feature three different controls for each band. We have the frequency or cutoff, which is the range or area we're going to target. Then we have the gain or boost/cut, which is the amount of gain or cut we're going to apply to that frequency area. And then finally, we have the Q or resonance, which is how broad or steep that boost or cut is. When it comes to music production, there are a few general uses for EQ that you might pull one out for. First up would be general cleanup work in your mix. Let's say you recorded some vocals, but the air conditioning was running, so there's a very low rumble to that sound. When it comes to vocals, generally you don't need a lot of that super low end information, so we can cut all that out to remove that from the recording. On the inverse, let's say you're recording some crunchy modern rock guitars, and when it comes to a lot of distorted guitar sounds, you generally don't need a lot of super high-end fizzy stuff, so we can cut that out as well. And what this does is it frees up this space in the mix for the other elements of the track that need to occupy that area. Case number two where you might want to pull out an EQ is to help elements that are competing in a mix, like a bass and a kick drum. If we think about things like a vocal and a guitar, or a bass and a kick drum, these things end up occupying very similar spaces in the overall frequency spectrum, and we can't have everything doing everything all the time. This is a great reason to pull out an EQ because we can use it to cut out the things that we don't necessarily need while giving a little bit of a boost to the other things that help that individual element stand out in the mix. One thing to keep in mind is it's all about context when it comes to making these kinds of decisions. Sometimes you'll end up EQing things, and if you solo them out, they'll sound really weird, but when you listen to it in the context of the full mix, it works. Case number three for using an EQ might be altering the overall balance of an element or a group of elements. Let's say you've got your mix done, but the drums just don't really sound bright enough, and it's almost like there's a blanket over them. In cases like that, you might use a shelving filter EQ to lift up just the high end across all of the drums by bussing them together and applying an EQ to the entire drum bus. This is a great tool to keep in mind to apply broad brush strokes of color to your mix in order to lift just the high end or just the low end of a single element or an entire group of things. Case number four would be using an EQ on the master bus, or the final stereo output of your mix. In some cases, you might have a mix that feels really good, but just needs a little bit of help at the last stage. You might need to add a little bit of air to the top end, or clear out some mid-range mud, or dial in the low end a bit so it translates a bit better and sounds better across different playback systems. Although using an EQ on the master bus can't fix any mistakes in the mixing stage, it can be a very helpful tool to color the overall tonal balance of the entire track. Finally, case number five you might pull out an EQ for is creative sound design. EQ is not only a good utility for basic cleanup work and helping things translate and making things stand out and sound a bit cleaner in the mix, but it can also be a powerful tool to get creative with. You can use EQ for a lot of different reasons to make things sound a bit more unique. You could use an EQ to create a telephone style effect. You could use it to create interesting filter sweeps, or even use really resonant EQs to create a resonant filter bank. With all that being said, I think it's fair to say that EQ is one of the most powerful tools you have as a producer, not only to shape the sound of your mix, but shape the sounds themselves in a creative way. With that in mind, it's really important to understand EQ and how it works and how you can best utilize it inside of your mixes, as well as understand the EQs you have access to in detail, because each one has a little bit of a different flavor to it, which we'll dive into in a later video. In the next video, we'll examine the different types of EQ, like parametric and graphic EQs, and explain some of the differences between them. And so that wraps everything up for this video. For more information on PSP plugins, you can head over to PSPaudioware.com, and for more PSP University, be sure to subscribe with the button down below.